Hey, welcome to Live from America podcast, Comedy Cellar. This is Hatem, alongside me, Mr. Noam Dworman, owner of the Comedy Cellar, my good friend. Are you back?
I'm back. I'm back.
Oh, he's back.
Yes, he is back. He was on vacation, and I was on vacation too. I was in a better vacation. And the one and only good friend and regular, very funny comedian and author of Iris Bureau Before COVID,
That's
Dan
true.
Naturman.
Thank you. How do you do?
I'm doing great. And our guest of honor, Jonathan Wackrow, is a former United States Service agent, a current CNN Law Enforcement Analyst, and Senior Managing Director and CEO of Teneo. Is it Teneo? Risk.
Teneo.
Teneo Risk. Yeah, it's Latin, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's a global risk consultancy. Jonathan spent the majority of his professional career as a special agent in the United States Secret Service, serving as a criminal investigator in New York City and a member of the Presidential Protection Division in Washington, D.C. He managed numerous high-level security operations, both in the United States and abroad, protecting the president and the first lady. And he's here now, so I feel safe.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Have you been to the cellar before?
Yes, years ago. Years ago, I have been.
Oh, nice. It's so different now. You should come. It's a lot of fun. And upstairs at the Olive Tree, are you familiar with any of the guys that come through? Harry Inton and Kurt Watts and all these guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have Noam have a debate table upstairs. It's pretty fun.
Oh,
You
I'd like to join that.
Yeah, you should come and hang out sometime. So I have so many questions, obviously, and all of us, I'm sure. Especially like what happened if Trump go to jail, or the moral obligation of agents, Secret Service, and all that. But we'll get to that later. So first is, can you tell us why and how did you join the Secret Service agency, and how can anybody join it if somebody's interested? I know I cannot, but anybody else?
Well, listen, it's a great question, and I think everybody's journey into the Secret Service takes a different path. I tell everybody that I think I lost a bet somewhere along the along the line. I was not in law enforcement. I was not in the military. I had no background in it whatsoever. I was actually in the hospitality industry. I was working for the old conglomerate ITT, which no longer exists, but they owned Madison Square Garden, the Knicks, the Rangers, Sheraton Hotels. I worked for them. And back in 97, 98, I was dealing in government relations for government contracts. But at that time, Hillary Clinton was running for Senate. Al Gore was running for president and was coming to New York a lot. So I had a lot of interaction with the White House and government officials at that time. And the Secret Service actually became a client of mine. And I think through various conversations over a couple of years, somehow an application to join the Secret Service landed in my desk. And I said, absolutely not. I would never want to do this. It's not my background. It's not what I do. But they were persistent, and the recruiters do a very good job at sort of scene setting and playing upon the value proposition of the Secret Service. And I started speaking with agents and really understanding the dual mission of investigation and protection. And as I talked to them about what they were doing, I saw their passion for protecting political leaders, because there's a duty there in terms of protecting democracy, as well as their desire to help others through criminal investigations. At the time, it was crimes against the Treasury. So it was credit card fraud, bank fraud, counterfeiting, electronic crimes, all these things directly related to theft of funds from people, from institutions. So I really saw this noble cause of joining the Secret Service for the dual mission. And it really was the women and men that made up the Secret Service at the time that was the biggest draw for me. I wanted to be who they were. I wanted to live that ethos, live a life of high values, really giving back to the country. Never thinking, though, that I would actually be able to make it through the application process. Back then, I believe there were about 12 phases of the application process. So I kept my expectations really low. I was, humbled that they had asked me if I wanted to join and gave me an application. And then they were persistent in persuading me to actually, file that application. But I never thought that I would actually make it through the whole process. And after about a year and a half, almost 2 years of processing and background checks and everything like that, I got my conditional offer. I started with the Secret Service in New York City. My first day really on the job was September 10th, 2001. That was day one of the academy for me. And what I thought my career was going to be on that day, obviously the very next day, everything changed. The Secret Service changed. I think, federal law enforcement changed forever. But I think that, my 14 years in the Secret Service were absolutely remarkable. And, I treasure every moment that I was with them.
It's very interesting. Noam, I never told you that story, but I have a similar story to you, but it turns out different for me, obviously. When I was working at the Comedy Cellar, do you remember when Gephardt was running for president and he did a party
Dick
at the Olive Tree?
who? Dick who?
I didn't say Dick. I said Gephardt.
Oh, Dick. I think it's Dick Gephardt. Yeah.
Yeah. He did a fundraiser at the Olive Tree, and he saw the Secret Service. I was working at the door, and I was unlike you. What attracted me was like I thought it was so cool. So I went and tell him like, how do I join the Secret Service? They're like, for what? Which country? So and that was the end of it. But yeah. So who did you work with? Can you say or no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, it started in 2001. So I worked for, the Secret Service is charged with protecting the president, the current president, vice president, their families, and designees of the president, but all former presidents and their spouses as well, along with all foreign dignitaries, heads of state and heads of government that are visiting the United States. So for me, starting off in New York City was just a remarkable opportunity where not only do we have constant visits by President Bush at the time and Vice President Cheney, but we also had a former former president, President Clinton, was living in Chappaqua, had just moved there. So we had a former president in district, and then with the UN, there wasn't a day that went by that we didn't have multiple foreign heads of state visiting New York City to either hold meetings at the UN or just visit, the region in general. So from a protective standpoint, you learn very, very quickly, really the taking the tradecraft of what you learned in the academy and actually, putting real world application to it. That coupled with, I was assigned to the counterfeit squad in New York City, and New York is, you could argue that New York is really ground zero in the United States for passing and production of counterfeit currency. Miami will try to claim that office, but there's just coming in from just one area, Columbia, but most of it, filters through New York City. So the counterfeit squad was very, very busy at that time, and it's dealing with the trifecta. It's guns, drugs, and money. So we worked very closely with the DEA and other federal law enforcement, local law enforcement entities to suppress counterfeit currency. And at that time, it wasn't the sort of the cheap counterfeit that you can make on a color printer today. It was really the old school offset, printing presses, the real counterfeit currency that, is very hard to, detect. And so it was a remarkable time period starting off in New York City.
Can you still count? I mean, with some of the new features in the current bills, that over the past few years, there's new bills, right, with different feature anti-counterfeiting features. Is it still possible to create a passable counterfeit bill nowadays?
It is, and I think that you hit on a key word there is passable, right? You have to be able to make that counterfeit currency to the environment that you're going to try to attempt the fraud. So, a lot of times in I'll just take New York City as a good example. You can print, 20s and $20, $50, and $100 bills on these printers and use them in different bodegas and stores. And if you have, if you believe in really commit to that fraud, that you're passing that, single bill there's a high likelihood of success. Now that bill is going to deteriorate quickly and become useless, but there are high instances that that you'll be able to pass that. The more sophisticated counterfeit currency that's out there, and most notably a bill that's called the super note, those are actually foreign nation state backed or foreign nation state proxies that are manufacturing that, very similar to the process that the United States takes to make their Federal Reserve notes. So there's a lot of time and dedication that goes into that type of counterfeit currency. And the use cases are separate. The counterfeit currency that is just a quick pass, they're trying to get something of immediate value, whether it's something they can just buy quickly in a bodega or quickly in a store, and hopefully not get caught. The nation state super notes and the more sophisticated counterfeit currency, the rationale there is to try to destabilize the U.S. economy, right? Like, if you can try to destabilize the U.S. dollar, not just in the United States but around the world, that's a significant intelligence tool that could be used against the United States. So there's two different really use cases today in counterfeit currency. It's not as common as it used to be because fraudsters find greater value through like electronic crimes and frauds committed other ways, but it still is present. It's present, in most major cities today still.
Is it possible to have for relatively cheaply for a bodega or other merchant to easily detect even the super notes, or are those except by an expert?
The super notes are definitely by an expert, and usually the super notes will go through the financial system until they return back to the Federal Reserve Bank, and only then are classified elements that are present in U.S. currency that most people don't know about. So you had highlighted some of those security security measures that we see all the time, whether it's the watermark, the different color shifting ink that are in the bills today. There's also a lot of classified elements of a Federal Reserve note, all the way down to the $1 bill that are present, that are not detected by even the most sophisticated counterfeiters. But those bills that are being made by them, they're not caught until they return to the Federal Reserve Bank.
By the way, guys, I'm sorry. This to me is fascinating, but if you don't want to, I have another question, but if you want to change topics,
go for it.
I just want to know if there's one country in the world that has the most counterfeit-proof note, or they're all roughly similar.
They're all roughly similar. What you have to think about, like, the people who make those notes, because the notes themselves are the product of plates. And those plates that press the imagery onto paper are really made by artists. So you can tell whether it's a note that's coming out of North Korea, there's a Russian note, an Israeli note, there's a Colombian note. There are traits that are present in all of them. And some of those traits are actually handed down generationally from artisan to artisan of people who are making that. So it is an interesting story. Again, I think it's a dying trade craft is the production of those very high quality super notes, but they're still present.
Okay.
Noam, you want to go?
I'm done with my counterfeiting.
Yes.
You continue, Hatem. Go ahead.
So I want to know about the moral obligation of agents. So you are assigned to, a president or somebody high level. Let's say a president. Like, what is it that you like? If you see something wrong, like what are you supposed to say and not say, do and not do? Can you report it? Can you because your job is to protect the man. He's supposed to trust you in a lot of ways. You're there all the time. So is there like a special unit that you can go to, or like what is exactly the obligation?
So you're saying, like, if we as a Secret Service agent witness a protectee doing something illegal, do we have a moral obligation to,
or even like a Clinton kind of thing, like he's inside, exactly what's going on, like what do you say, what do you do? Or Trump with the January 6th, all that,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Secret Service, you have to think of it this way: they're federal law enforcement agents first and foremost, right? And they are charged, and they have to uphold the oath to protect the Constitution. So there have been instances where Secret Service agents have seen something And so, the cases that I know of, it's been of a foreign protectee engaging in some sort of illegal activity. They would raise that either to the State Department or through diplomatic channels. But for U.S.-based protectees, they do have an obligation. They do have an obligation to notify other law enforcement agencies if they see a crime being committed, if they witness a crime being committed, or they can be called upon. And we're seeing that, firsthand with former President Trump, where Secret Service agents are called in front of grand juries, and they have to testify to what they witnessed, what they saw, and they have to be truthful. And, I have the confidence that those agents, who are called in, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to necessarily do that because you're betraying the trust that protectee has has given you, and the access that they've given you into their life. But at the end of the day, you have an obligation, right? You swore an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States, to uphold the laws of this country, regardless of who the individual is. And it goes back to no one is above the law.
Interesting. So if I'm say protecting Noam, and I see some like he's not doing something illegal, but I know something is, but I don't have enough information to know what is he up to, so that's one thing. But I don't know. It's tempting. So now if Trump goes to jail, or any president, will you be assigned to go to jail with them?
Listen, you have to, Secret Service, this is a question that comes up all the time right now. And unless the law changes, right? Unless the Congress changes the law that says the Secret Service is not mandated to protect former presidents, whether if they're incarcerated, the Secret Service will coordinate the protective structure of any protectee, whether they're walking around or on the street or incarcerated because of some sort of judicial action. Now, there's going to be a big structure that potentially will be set up around a protectee that is incarcerated. But I always joke, in some instances, it makes the Secret Service job a little bit easier. You always know where that protectee is going to be. You know that the perimeter is pretty fortified. You're not worried about anybody breaking into jail. So, it's more about, establishing a protective, maintaining the protective methodology by the Secret Service, regardless of where that protectee is. And that methodology is protecting them 360 degrees in all directions at all times.
That's how you protect the president?
Correct.
Ah, interesting. One thing I never understood is like when I go to a club, like you see a bouncer, he's like huge and muscular, and like you're like, okay, I'm not coming near. But it seems to me like the Secret Service, like at least the one that we see, you rarely see that. Like you rarely see like that form of like bodybuilding. Am I right, or there's like some hidden in there?
It's a different application of protection, right? So when you see the bouncer or the big bodyguards, there's that structure is twofold. One, it's to intimidate people. So they don't try anything. Look at how big I am. Look at how strong I am. Don't try anything. And the second thing is just it's reactive, right? They have to be big and strong because they're probably by themselves. They are reacting to the situation that is presented to them. That is not what the Secret Service does. The Secret Service actually applies a protective methodology that looks at vulnerabilities in advance. They do detailed threat assessments. They understand what type of threats and hazards are facing our protectees. What are the vulnerabilities of the environment that we're going into or potentially going into? And then we apply control measures to mitigate those threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. We want to control the environment at all time, whether it's through environmental manipulation, through control measures, through manpower, through technology. We control the environment. We make sure that those protectees are safe at all times. So we take a very proactive, advanced process, or apply a proactive, advanced process to eliminate threats, so that whenever we go into that environment, that protectee is safe. In contrast to that bodyguard is walking into an environment never knowing what could happen. Now, the Secret Service also trains for the reactive side of it, whether it's tactical, medical, or relocation. What do we do in those situations? But we don't want to rely upon that. We want to control the environment at all times so that we don't have to be dependent on reaction.
Wow. I have a million questions. I just like Dan. So if anybody want to jump in, please go ahead. Dan, you have anything you want to say before or Noam?
Go ahead.
There's one incident with the Egyptian president. I'm Egyptian originally in Ethiopia when he was there, and he had like 10 or 20 like of in his team, and they protected they were attacking Ethiopia from everywhere, and they managed to escape and save him and go back. And I knew one of these guys, and the first thing they did was to not fire them but move them somewhere else, because they say now people know your reaction to certain things. Is that what are you talking about when you say methodology? Like, is that why some Secret Service are always changed? Like, you don't see the same person, because people can know how Jonathan reacts certain way, certain side, certain. Is that something, or just?
Well, I think that you see a rotation in personnel just because of I don't want to say burnout, but the risk of burnout. It's very hard to typically agents on the president's detail usually run about 4.5 to 5 years on that high stress environment. There's only so long you can do that before you become one of two things: burnt out or complacent, right? So they want to make sure that the personnel remain refreshed and that you're constantly changing over. In terms of how we react, every Secret Service agent spends an astronomical amount of their time training, and you want to make sure that it's a very coordinated response on how the Secret Service will react to a whole multitude of situations. We train on that constantly. We train on how do we get out of the vehicles? How do we deploy? How do we cover and evacuate the protectee? Our tactics aren't dependent upon an individual. Our tactics are applied that the individuals learn, practice, because you need to work in a very coordinated fashion. So if I'm working on a team, let's say that we're all of us are protecting Noam. What we're going to do is all of us know the roles and responsibilities of our position. It's not dependent on John Wackrow. It's not dependent on anybody else. It's dependent on my position and what that position does if presented with a threat, if presented with a hazard that we have to react to. So agents spend an astronomical amount of time, not only in their basic training, but throughout their entire career, constantly, remaining focused, because the threat environment changes constantly. Think about even just in the last 2 years, 3 years, what the threat environment across the country looks like. We used to think about, for a majority of my time in the Secret Service, it was always about foreign terrorism. It was always about, the potential for another foreign terror attack that is going to be launched against our protectees. Today, the Secret Service is looking within the borders, right? Domestic extremism is out of control. And those are threats that are hiding in plain sight. Those violent domestic extremists are walking among us. So how do you protect? So you think about, that's a drastically different threat environment that agents and law enforcement broadly are dealing with, that I didn't have to deal with when I was an agent. It was on the rise, but it wasn't to the level it is today.
When I was in law school, I actually went to law school. I'm a comedian, but I went to law school. President Clinton, I don't know, maybe 93, 94, but President Clinton came, for some reason he was in the area, and then he came to, this was Fordham Law. He came into the building and kind of greeted us. I'm pretty sure I shook his hand, but it was a long time ago. And he said, "Good luck on your finals." But it would have been easy enough for any one of us to shoot him, I think.
Yeah,
it was right there. Is there what research would have gone into that? Did some Secret Service agent look at all the students and say, was my name looked at, and okay, he seems okay? What kind of what research and preparations would you do for something like that?
So it depends on if it was a known event, if it was something that was pre-planned and it was a public event that was known by the public. There would have been a very specific security structure that is applied to that, where you'd go through magnetometers, you would have been screened. It does not sound like that was what happened on that day.
No, no.
The other structure is a thing called an OTR, an off-the-record movement, where the president or any other protectee makes an unannounced stop somewhere. Now, the benefit of that is that you have the element of surprise, right? Like people don't know, so an adversary can't set up and potentially launch an attack because they don't know where you are.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where the reactive structure, and we talked about this a moment ago, the Secret Service become a little bit less dependent on the proactive advance and more dependent upon their reactionary skills. But they're playing to an environment that people didn't know they were coming. So the likelihood of an attack being launched right there is minimal. But the tactics that we deploy are going to be a little bit different. You're going to see more personnel working closer to the protectee as opposed to an environment that we control 100%. You'll see them accordion out a little bit, spread out, because we know that the crowd in front of us doesn't have weapons. We know that they're, the likelihood of presenting a longer range threat is minimal. When we work in that OTR environment, off the record environment, we have to work much closer because we just don't know what we could be presented with.
And what the hell was, I mean, I know it's a long time ago, but,
and just for the record, Dan, you look like you could kill a president. Like you look like one of those.
Well, have I not shaved? Is that? I mean, when Lincoln went to that theater, this was probably the most detested president we've ever had. Just going back a few years, obviously. But, I mean, what the hell was that about? He just goes to the theater.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was so interesting.
With no protection.
History. Obviously, the president gets shot, not protected by the Secret Service at that time. However, the last official act of President Lincoln was to form the Secret Service. He signed the Secret Service into existence just as he left the White House to Ford's Theater.
And by the way, you ever see that video on YouTube where the guy that was in the theater on the night Lincoln was shot survived? He was 5 years old and he survived into the era of television, and he's being interviewed on I've Got a Secret, that TV show.
No, I haven't seen that.
Anyway, it was the guy who was in Ford's Theater and he's on TV talking about it.
That's crazy.
That's actually very interesting that he signed the formation of the Secret Service that day.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know that you would jump in front of president, or how do they train you that you will go on jump? Is that actually a thing, or is it a myth? Like,
no,
are you supposed to?
So the job of a Secret Service agent, and anyone who's doing, executive protection and close protection, what you're doing is you are putting yourself between a threat and the protectee. Now, I don't know if that threat is a gun, a knife, a chemical agent, but you are putting yourself in between yourself and that protectee to ensure that the protectee remains safe. People say like, oh, like you jump in front of a bullet. Like, first of all, if I knew a bullet was coming and I could jump in, I'd try to stop them from even shooting it in the first place. But through training in tactics and really your experience as a Secret Service agent, you're understanding in a moment of an incident or a threat presents itself, you have a lot of different actions that need to be taken at the same time. There are agents that are solely responsible for the protectee, and then there are agents that present themselves to the threat. They make themselves bigger. They try to absorb that whatever type of threat that is, to give the agents that are responsible for moving the protectee off of what we refer to as the X, off of the target site. If I can give them 1, maybe 2 extra seconds to move, that's the difference between life and death. So there are some that are, we call it maximum to the protectee, minimum to the problem. They're going to put all of their attention on moving that protectee, whether it's into a safe room, into back into the vehicle. How are we going to exfiltrate ourselves in the protectee from the situation or that location? Do we have to move slightly? Is this a coordinated attack where we have to hunker down and now launch a counterattack and start defensive fighting in terms of like if we're in a building? But everyone knows that. We practice that ad nauseum. You might go to our academy and practice various scenarios for 10 hours a day for 5 days straight. And just keep repeating So you know exactly what you're going to do in that moment. And there are, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, so and now is the president wearing a bulletproof vest? Are you guys wearing a bulletproof vest? Who's got the vest on?
So Secret Service agents always have vests on, just like law enforcement. Anywhere, uniformed or plain clothes, officers are wearing vests. Why? Because the threat environment necessitates it, right? Like almost everything includes a gun these days. So wearing a vest is essential. It's essential to the life safety of the agent. However, it is also essential to create a shield, a human shield around our protectees. There are various times that protectees will wear ballistic vests. I think the most notable was that people found out afterwards was that when President Bush threw out the first pitch after 9/11 at Yankee Stadium, he was wearing a ballistic vest underneath his clothing. So again, based upon the threat environment that the protectee is going in, we will apply different control measures that are necessary for that moment.
What about protection of the head? I mean, is there a helmet that can be effective?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if it was up to every Secret Service agent, we'd want our protectees in a big steel box. But the reality is that these are political public figures. Their job is to try to be with the public, be as open as possible and as viewable as possible, with not feel like they're hiding behind things. And there's a balance between protective measures and public accessibility, and you have to find that right balance. You have to work with their staff on what is appropriate and for the scenario that you're going into. I mean, we bring a president into a war zone. Look, we're going to put him in heavily armored vehicles. They are going to wear Kevlar, hard plates. They're going to wear all this other stuff. Someone goes into a boardroom to give a presentation to business leaders. Completely different environment, completely different security structure.
But both Lincoln and Kennedy were both shot in the head, right?
Yes, one at close range, one at long range.
Yeah.
So Kennedy was shot.
What's the typical Secret Service person's take on the Kennedy assassination? They believe it was a lone gunman, or do they believe the RFK Jr. stuff?
I think we spend a lot of time researching. Well, let me give you a deviate here for a second. In the Secret Service, we say that our policies and procedures are born out of blood, and we look at every incident that we are faced with and do extensive after action reviews. And when you look at the time, I mean, agents spend a lot of time looking at the Kennedy assassination and what went wrong to ensure that it never happens again. There were immediate things that were, protocols that were put into place. Like you do not see presidents traveling in open air vehicles. You see more dedication to motorcade route security. You see a lot of the application of counter snipers now. All of that came out of the Kennedy assassination. So when we look at it as an agency, we look at, and you have to acknowledge what went wrong. You can't try to say like this didn't happen. It did happen. The president died while under our protection. How can we ensure that this never happens again? But again, the agency wasn't thinking of a long range threat like that. That changed the game forever with the attempted assassination of President Reagan. Changed a lot of protocols for the Secret Service again. The attempts on President Ford by Squeaky Fromm changed protocol forever. So we look at those critical moments, those critical incidents, and make sure that we're getting better from them, and we're not just remaining complacent. We're understanding that threat environment, the threats that we're presented with, can change. Now we try to go through, and I think the Secret Service does a very good job in modern time at looking at every type of potential eventuality that could happen and applying protective, putting it into the protective rubric. But over time, we see that, you may miss something.
I think with both.
Wait, we didn't get an answer to the question. What's the typical belief of the Secret Service? Do they think it was a lone gunman, or do they?
They think it was a lone gunman. Yes, not the RFK Jr. stuff.
Yeah.
I was saying like I think it's the both Reagan and JFK was the fault of the Secret Service, because if they had Clint Eastwood or Kevin Costner, you guys would have no.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it would have been. Yeah, it would have been. Maybe the outcome would have been different there.
Yeah, I think Clint Eastwood was off that day, right? That's not the movie.
Yeah, he was not working. That was his day off. He was going to work the next day.
Yeah. Which movie from all these movies do you think is like can give actually, I remember even like Seinfeld when he did in Cars, Comedians in Car with President Obama. He said the Secret Service won't let us out. Is that true? Like, can you tell the president what to do, or if he wants to go out, he goes out?
There's agreements with the president on what they can do. Listen, they understand the threats that they're facing, right? They know, because they read the intelligence reports. They know, they see the threats that are coming inbound, and for the continuity of the United States, right? The continuity of maintaining our democracy. They know that they can't act recklessly and put themselves at harm. Sometimes it looks like they're doing that, but the Secret Service is going to be there to, at least be the control measure to say that, one, you can't do this. The threats are too high. Secret Service is not going to bring especially the president of the United States, into an environment that is unsafe. They're just not going to do it. That includes war zones. So we brought presidents to Afghanistan and to Iraq. We make sure that those environments are safe for the president. But we're just not going to put, like, president can say, I want to do this. We're just not going to do that.
They can countermand a direct order from the president. They can't do that.
We can. The Secret Service doesn't report to the president of the United States. We report to Congress. We're mandated under law to protect the president of the United States. Now, out of respect for the office and everything like that, we're going to try to make every accommodation that's possible. But listen, I think if you really want to see, the Secret Service drawing a line, look back to what happened on January 6th, when when President Trump demanded to go to Capitol after his speech. Demanded. We know that. That's not in dispute. The Secret Service did understand what that request was. They worked with their local law enforcement counterparts to say, can we safely bring the president up to this location? The answer was no, we can't. The environment is destabilizing rapidly. We know, and we saw this from the January 6th committee. We've seen it from the written reports, eyewitness testimony, that outside of the president's rally, there were armed individuals. So the Secret Service knew from a threat, a rapid threat assessment, that you had unmitigated armed individuals that were outside of a protective environment, that were moving towards the Capitol. There is not an agent in their right mind that would actually contemplate, like, in saying, hey, we're just going to go. We worked with the law enforcement counterparts. We knew that the Capitol environment was destabilizing. The route from the White House, the ellipse, to the Capitol was destabilizing because of these groups that were all over the place. The Secret Service said no. Now, we know what the repercussions are of that. We knew that the former president was unhappy, to say it. There are a lot of sort of conflicting stories about the level of his unhappiness in the limo as they returned to the White House. So rather than going to the Capitol as he wanted, was actually demanding, they went right back to the White House because they knew that there was something bigger going on, and they needed to ensure that the president in the office of the presidency was safe.
How is that different than when George W. Bush went to New York in 9/11 and that famous place, like when with the firefighters and all that, and knowing that probably was more dangerous than because we didn't know at that time what's going on, and if
we didn't. So that it's great they bring it up, because yes, we didn't know, were there more attacks coming? We didn't, and listen, we really didn't understand the enemy either. We didn't understand the totality of what that attack meant and who did it. And
it was well known for I'm sorry to cut you off. It was well known for Al Qaeda at that time that they will have 3 bombs timed differently, like they did in Hotel Pakistan. One would blow up, waiting for the big officers to come in and blow up the next one. So that was known. I'm not saying I know it personally. I'm just saying it was
no. And I think you look back at like the intelligence agencies knew that, but we also didn't know. We did know what Al Qaeda's methodology and how their attack methodology was. We didn't know were there copycat attackers. There were a lot of things you didn't know. Now, having those unknowns meant that the Secret Service, working with the military, working with the NYPD, had to over-index on every type of protective structure that they could put into place to allow the president to go to ground zero. Right? There were airspace restrictions. There was there were no public. It was everybody. There was a massive structure. When you look at the picture of with President Bush up with a megaphone talking to the first responders who were working there, what I see when I see that some of those iconic pictures is I see a lot of Secret Service agents wearing basically blending in plain clothes because we control the environment. We flooded the environment with agents and officers to make sure that there was this bubble around the president, allowing him to go into that environment. Again, not knowing, were we going to get another attack if the president is there? Again, there's a risk calculus. You're never going to eliminate risk. What you're going to try to do is lower it as much as possible. But you're always going to operate in an environment of risk.
No, we cannot hear you. Your mic is muted.
Oh, it's probably not worth going into, but I just find it really interesting. I'm thinking about it. It's interesting what you said. I didn't realize that the Secret Service is created by Congress. Makes sense. But the protection of the president is to protect the president, not to decide for the president what is in the best, how he feels he needs to do his job, who is also the commander in chief, which means, well, he's everything, which means that he can decide that he wants to do something that's dangerous because he feels it's necessary. Has this ever really been tested? I mean, it feels to me like it's a gray area because
you're right. I think you're right. So a couple of things to sort of break that down. President is the commander in chief, but of the armed forces. He's not the commander in chief. He's the chief executive of the executive branch. And
I backed off that because I realized that's thing. But that's why I said he's in charge of. He's the chief executive and he's the chief law enforcement officer. He's the chief everything, right? Yeah. So if he says, I mean, there's a famous story where RFK Jr., when he was running for president, I think got on the hood of the car when Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was dangerous. And he gave that speech and he calmed things down. I don't remember all the details, but I know he did something that was considered brave. The president may say, I understand it's dangerous, but I feel that the moment requires me to do something brave. So he wants to go somewhere. And the Secret Service said, Mr. President, it's too dangerous. He said, well, I'm sorry. I want to do it. Doesn't the president then take precedence over the Secret Service that they have to say, okay, well, our job is to protect the president in his execution of his duties. In the end, he's the final decider on what the execution of his duties are. I guess we'll have to go along with him, no?
If the Secret Service makes a determination that it is unsafe.
You're on your own, Mr. President. We're out of here.
They can't. So the Secret Service under 18 USC 3056, that is our statute. We, the agency and the agents, are held under statute to protect the president. Period. Right. And every other protectee that the Secret Service has can waive protection. They can give a waiver and say, I don't want Secret Service. And we say, fine, thank you very much. We're gone. The president is the only one that does not have that right. You have to think about, why are we protecting the president? We're protecting the president as an individual, but we're also protecting the office of the presidency. We're protecting the continuity of the U.S. government. And Congress recognized that, and that's why it's in the statute. I think the only time that I have seen it really being tested is on January 6th. And I saw agents say no to the president of the United States. We are not doing that because it is not safe. Now, to your point, Noam, if the president really feels that they have to go somewhere, then you have to give us time to make that environment safe. Because the worst thing you can do is act recklessly and have harm befall upon you. Because it's not just harm to you, it's harm to the country. You potentially put our democracy at risk, and you just can't do that.
In retrospect,
what do you mean by put a democracy at risk?
If you're acting recklessly and there's a high likelihood that the president is going to get killed, you're putting by a foreign adversary, let's say, may take an opportunity to launch an attack. There's so many things that could go wrong upon the immediate death of a president. Now there's the order of succession and all of that, but that could be challenged. That there's all things that could happen. Why do that? Why test the Constitution at that point in time unnecessarily? Why not establish protective structure around the president? Now, I have seen presidents not like decisions or recommendations that the Secret Service has made, but I have never experienced a president not accepting the recommendations that.
No, I have. Jimmy Carter got out of the car during his inauguration and walked. I remember this as a child. It was a big thing. He they had the car with the bulletproof glass and everything was supposed to go up, and he said, "No, I'm getting out." And he got out and he walked, and he and Raza waved on Massachusetts Avenue, whatever it is.
Yep.
And I think Bush in ground zero.
Against
and if you look at
Secret Service.
No, it didn't surprise the Secret Service. So there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors here. If you look at every single president's going to get out at the same location along that Pennsylvania Avenue during the inauguration. And I can say that because I was a presidential parade coordinator. So I know the history and exactly. You want to be able to, presidents want to be able to present accessibility to the public. They don't want to be seen as, hiding behind a wall of agents, hiding behind, ballistic glass all the time. They're politicians. They want to get out there. They want to be with the people that just had elected them. Now, this is a give and take. It's a negotiation with the staff on how do we align to their objectives of trying to make the protectee, the president, accessible to the public while maintaining 360 degrees of coverage in all directions at all time around the president. So if you look back at what Jimmy Carter did, you look back at what Bush had done, Bush Senior, Clinton, everybody. There are a lot of times when you go like, wow, I can't believe that they did that. When you see those moments, those weren't presidents acting recklessly. That was a very, very coordinated security event to satisfy the optic without compromising on security.
On a scale of 1 to 10 of recklessness, 10 being the most reckless, how reckless was Lincoln's decision to go to the theater that evening?
Well, he listen, it definitely didn't work out for him, but he wasn't under. There was no Secret Service. There was no law enforcement.
But just as a personal decision, had you been there, I mean, I guess this requires a certain knowledge of that time, and it just seemed to me like this guy, half the country hated him, and he's going to the theater. It seemed kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, different.
Even if he didn't have Secret times. Even if he didn't have Secret Service, I'm sure he have some kind of bodyguards. Here's a very important.
I think he had one bodyguard that was there.
To the best of your knowledge.
But that was, I guess, that was like the Barbie of its day, our American cousin. To
the best of your knowledge, were there ever a body double of any president?
No.
No, never.
Not to my knowledge at all.
But it's
like-
funny because it's very popular in the rest of the world.
It's
North Korea, Middle East, a lot, especially in Korea. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Not in the United States. I mean, I've never seen it applied under our structure ever. Yeah, I mean, there was I think after the inauguration of the Trump, there was a lot of people that are saying that there was a body double of Melania, which just over rotated in the media for a long time, and that's just it's nonsensical in our structure.
Oh, interesting. Do they
By the-
get?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
But no, I have a Lincoln quote that I just looked up.
Yeah.
Said on his way to the War Department earlier that day with his bodyguard, Lincoln said, "Crook, do you know I believe that there are men who want to take my life, and I have no doubt they will do it. I know no one could do it and escape alive," he said, "but if it is to be done, it is impossible to prevent it." Maybe he wanted to die, Lincoln.
Yeah.
Where are you reading this?
Apparently had terrible depression.
Yes, I did read that. He suffered that his entire life.
Yeah. Do they get to pick their Secret Service like we see in the movies, like the main guy and all that, or no?
No, not they may have a preference. The only time that it's not that they get to pick presidents who go through a campaign. They may feel very comfortable with certain agents, or from a supervisory standpoint, that they work with during a presidential campaign, because you do get very close to the protectee. They may make a request to have them transferred to the president's detail, but there are a lot of factors that go into that request as well. It's not like, hey, I really like John, I want him. You want to try to please the president, make them comfortable with the protective structure that's around them, but it's not typically they're not picking somebody.
See, my idol, if I'm ever president, is Gaddafi. I want his Secret Service.
That was a crazy structure. I worked that detail in New York as a young agent.
Oh, with the tent?
With the tent and the female agents, or I don't know what they were, protecting him, and then him driving down Fifth Avenue, because he only would use his limousine, and he had like a 1978 Mercedes-Benz limo, which is crazy. We didn't think the thing started. I mean, it was just in rough shape, and he would drive down the road like waving to everybody. I mean, just bonkers.
It's great. What you can tell us about that deal? Like, I'm very like, were these women like, are they like really like secrets, or is it like just there for the show? Like, what do you have any knowledge on that?
Listen, I had the opportunity to work with hundreds of foreign heads of state, heads of government, and I witnessed some of the most amazing professional protection agents that some of them rival the Secret Service. They're so very well trained. They apply their trade craft well. And then I saw the worst of the worst, which was people that would come off that people that come in, you would look at their weapons, and their weapons are all rusted. They had no idea why they were there. We had one foreign head of state, his lead agent didn't have shoes coming off the literally didn't have shoes. And you're like,
which one is that?
Can you JFK Airport. Did you leave your shoes on the plane? He had the backstory there was he was wearing a sandal. The sandal broke, and he only had a pair of sandals. And so he just came off the plane with no shoes. It's like, okay, we know what we're dealing with here. But that's why the Secret Service, we're not dependent on foreign security. We have a mission. We are charged with protecting those foreign heads of state, regardless what protection they have. Ideally, you'd like to work with a really competent counterparts, but the reality is sometimes they don't exist.
Can you tell them what to do if they're foreign?
I really can't tell them what to do. We can explain the threats that they're facing here in the United States. We can walk through our protective methodology and structure. If they don't like it, though, they can actually waive protection.
Oh, wow.
Most
So
of them don't. I don't think that I've actually seen a foreign head of state waive protection. I've seen their spouses do it. Their spouses do it quite often, but there's a convenience factor too to having the Secret Service that, from a logistics standpoint and everything like that, access standpoint, that they don't want to give up either.
Oh, wow. Do you, like a lot of reporters, a lot of people in the war, a lot of zone and stuff like that, PTSD. Do you ever feel like this is something that could apply to you or agents in general? Because it's kind of job like you're in the middle of like, oh shit, what's going on? I don't know what's coming, or not really.
I think that any agents that go through, and this is law enforcement in general, so I'm gonna broaden it out a little bit. Anybody that goes through a traumatic situation, they're at risk for a whole multitude of consequences, and one being post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, I look at I know agents who, not in the protective. Remember, we have a dual mission of protection and investigation. I know agents that have been in shootings, and they suffer from a series of stress afterwards. But most law enforcement officers do. Anytime you have a officer involved shooting, you're definitely worried about the mental health, the behavioral health of anybody who goes through that type of traumatic situation. So yeah, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility at all.
Oh, wow. So so the last thing is, like, for me is the movies. Which movie you think or you feel that can can be correct about Secret Service and relationship between President and Secret Service and stuff like that?
I haven't seen any of them that have really captured the real essence of what being a Secret Service agent is. I think that there is a lot of liberties taken by Hollywood on a lot of things, but I have yet to. It's hard for me to watch those movies too. It's because there's a little bit of a cringe factor, like it's just not right.
Well, it's like when we watch a movie about comedy. It is similar insofar as if you have personal knowledge of something, you realize just how inaccurate the movies are.
Well, that's it, and I think it's the if you look at a comedian who's up doing a set, right, and you're like, oh my god, what you're not looking at or not realizing is the struggle that she or he went through to get there, right? Like the years of dedication to honing that trade craft, to the years of rejection, potentially the struggle of getting to that microphone, and then that microphone is going to dictate success or failure, right? Like, are people going to resonate with what you say? Are they going to get it? Or is it just going to fall flat? Same thing with the Secret Service. You see a Secret Service agent who's standing next to the president, like, wow, that's cool. What you don't realize is the 10 to 15 years that preceded that, of working midnight shifts, traveling away from your family, working long investigations, sort of that struggle, never knowing, are you ever going to be that guy next to the president? Do I have what it takes to get there? I mean, and that backstory, like, is just not. I don't think Hollywood wants to tell that story. They want to show that guy like running into a crowd and shoot him up and like all the action. They don't want to see everything else.
That's interesting. Yeah. I never thought
what
about that.
characteristic that make you go that far? Is it just time, or is it like you must be good at a lot of things to reach president level, stuff like that? Reflection, reaction, stuff like that. Is it physically or mentally or both? Like, what is it?
It's yes to everything, right? And I think it's obviously there's a physical component. There's competencies with your weapons, but it's really understanding how to. And again, it's a little bit of tradecraft. It's what you learn throughout your course of the career as a Secret Service agent. How do you understand a changing in dynamic threat environment, right? Because a threat never remains at rest. And if anybody ever thinks it does, then that's when they become complacent, and that's when bad things happen. So you have to be able to have that intellectual curiosity constantly to test yourself, to say, okay, how can I do this better? How can I provide this structure better? I mean, listen, the president is also a creature of habit. They go to the same locations a lot. And what you never want to do is just apply the same security measures that you did before for the next time. And that's where agents could become complacent, but you have to say, what did I miss? What am I thinking about? What should I be doing different? How do I make this safer? How do I make this better? Those types of agents are the ones that really are excelling, to one of the larger details, because that's who you want on that detail. Someone who's really looking around the corner at the threats that are coming. How do I apply a different type of structure to this to make sure that we're not caught off guard?
Would it affect your policy as an individual to be assigned to certain presidents?
You mean from like a political level, political angle? No, I mean, this is, and it's interesting, I think, in the age of President Trump, where we saw a level of, where politics really crept into protection, where people started saying, well, the Secret Service, they're just proxies to Trump. They're just this. And listen, I know I worked with a lot of the agents that were on that detail. I know them personally. I can tell you that really didn't happen. The Secret Service is an organization. It's not there to satisfy one person. They applied the protection the way that they would apply it to Obama if he was there. People didn't like what the president was doing. Half the country didn't like it, half the country liked it. But those who didn't like it, they said, like, well, why would you allow the president to do that? Well, it's because the president could do that. He wanted to do that. We built a protective structure around him, and he can do what he wants. As long as it's safe. It's not for us to dictate politics, but talking about how much travel costs and all of that stuff really starts like putting pressure, introducing politics into protective structure, and I think that's I think that's wrong. My time in the Secret Service, and I can tell you that I never witnessed anybody's personal beliefs, like personal political beliefs, being introduced into their into how they applied protection, but what they did for things. Now, there are people who you could say, well, I think that he seems like a very conservative. Maybe he's a Republican, but we never talked about politics. We never talked about what our political beliefs were. And what I'm hearing today is that people still don't do that. You have to push all of that aside. You have to push politics aside. It's hard because there are a lot of influences, but you have to put the politics aside because it's detractive to what you're doing. Your job is protection. And if you allow politics or bias or anything to be introduced into that protective rubric, then you're going to fail. And agents have to learn how to bifurcate the two.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all this information. I mean, I feel like we could talk for hours, but this is awesome. Except if Danny or Noam have another question, but we can go. But you definitely should come and visit us and hang out and talk more about all the stuff. And
that would be great. Everybody would be totally fascinated to meet you. That would be great if you come down.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And I know you have your legal analyst, Danny, who joins the programming all the time. I think he has a house. I'm down by the beach. I think him and his wife still have a house right down the street from me here. We could all join.
Don't dox Danny.
Yeah, but
that's why I said down the street, not too far down.
That's pretty sloppy stuff for a Secret Service agent.
Former. I'm not there anymore.
But yeah, I would send you our information. But I have your number. I'll text you. But yeah, it will be great if you come and see it. Mondays is my favorite night there because there's music too. Noam plays music and we can watch comedy and all that. And nice. I still have hopes. Maybe I'll be a Secret Service one day. Do you have to be a certain age?
You have to be under 35.
I still got time.
You still got it. You still got it. You know, I know some people. We can get you an application.
Yes. Let's move on. Well, thank you so much. If you guys want to share your information, where people can find you, all that. Dan, you have anything coming up you want to share? I need a book.
Oh,
What about your book?
You can, we have Noam and I have our podcast that's on Sirius XM radio it's a radio show on Raw Dog every Thursday at 7 p.m. And then, wherever you get your podcast, the Comedy Cellar podcast that I do with Noam, and have a listen.
Yeah. Jonathan, you have anything coming up?
No, nothing from my side. I appreciate the opportunity though today. This was a blast. It was fun.
Thank you so much. And of course, Comedy Cellar all the time. Great shows, make reservations, all sold out. So it's great shows. It's worth it. Hope to see you all soon.
Okay, bye-bye.